Fantastic, fantastic, fantastic. So, just as the label of today's stream suggests, with the image as well, of course, we're all at this point in time interfacing with a really, really interesting phenomena in the world at the moment. And I would definitely say that technology has influenced our ability to be updated and interconnected in a way that hasn't been, like, I would say in human history, it hasn't been this available. We don't have access to this information at such a fast pace, which of course adds to aspects of ourselves as a human race that we may have not actually had much experience on or with. So as I'm sure all of you know, there's lots of things going on. We've had many sort of crises take place over the last year. In 2019, we've always had these types of crises, and the way that we've dealt with them just depends on the nature of where we are as a race. Whereas now, what's interesting is that the nature of the crisis that we're all experiencing, this, yeah, exactly, it's a total internet pandemic. The nature of the crisis itself is now speaking specifically to the structures within our lives that our most invested security is in. Okay. So before we even go into that type of conversation, I think what's important to probably acknowledge is that I hope that for any of you that have got situations or circumstances where somebody that has been exposed to some form of this virus, or that there are situations and circumstances that are really it's really in your face and it's really difficult to deal with. I just hope that for whatever it is that takes place in your life, that something positive and something positive comes your way completely. Because I don't even pretend to know what it's like to be in a situation or an experience where this type of situation is affecting somebody that's very close to me. So for any of you that have got that situation, just hope that everything works out for you in the end. Okay. Because it's a pretty intense time, I'm sure, for so many of us in different ways. And it's not fun, regardless of the fact if it's something that's real or not, if it's something that's widespread, if it's fear, etc. Ultimately, beneath everything, all of us are human beings that in some way, shape, or form are, being affected by it in different ways. And that's a big deal. I don't think that we need to downplay any of our experiences and measure it against different experiences. Like, I think we all in our own way have got a connection to this situation that is very real for us, and to acknowledge that in that sense. So that's something that I think is really important to just start off with. So I want to talk about the astrology of this phenomena, and I want to try and highlight some things that I would say coming from an astrological perspective. Just kind of trying to make sense of it, trying to help us maybe process through what we're moving through at this point in time, and hopefully to bring some value, as we interact with this really intense energy and phenomena that's really like right in front of us at this point in time. Okay. Where is the chart? So there it is. I want to get a little marker over there so everybody could see. So just do that and that over there. Okay, so everybody can see my marker. And I've got some notes that I wanted to talk about. Okay, so Neptune, where is Neptune? Let me just move that out the way. There's Neptune, there's Pisces. Okay, Neptune, Pisces, Sun, Neptune conjunction. So there you got Neptune and the Sun conjunction, and then you got this Neptune or Pisces symbolism over there. Okay. Now, the archetype of Neptune, okay, and so when I talk about archetype, I mean the very essence that births expression of something. So each archetype is like a birthing point, an origin that stimulates or permeates creation, and then what manifests from that creation itself is the essence of the archetype. And the essence of the archetype for Pisces is the natural desire to return to singularity. Okay, it's the natural desire or the natural progression. And even the language I use in and of itself doesn't capture the actual essence of the archetype. So it's really difficult to kind of language or label the expression of Pisces. But if you had to imagine water as a body, it would be indivisible. Okay, it's indivisible in that way. So Neptune is the natural desire within our expression that returns us to singularity, right? Non-duality. And so this singularity, this expression, this Pisces energy dissolves any division, any boundary, all right, that separates. So the essence of Neptune is the progressive dissolving or decaying of something that ultimately returns to the original essence, okay, that which started with Aries. So Neptune's expression in terms of our human experience can show up as where boundaries are dissolved, where there isn't an ability to actually put something concrete in place to protect. So an example that shows up is, if you notice, this kind of pandemic started to really become more intense once the sun's progression through Pisces was taking place and eventually crossing over Neptune. This over the last week. And what this symbolizes is that where it doesn't matter, where we have physical boundaries, where people say, you're not allowed to enter my country because we have in our system no sense that you have a passport or a visa, as an example, so you're not allowed to come into the country. That's like a physical man-made law that's put in place. Whereas as the sun moves through Pisces and moves through Neptune, what happens is we see an expression of energy that ignores man-made laws and permeates as it moves, and we can't actually even see it in that sense with the visible eye. That's another thing about Neptune and Pisces. It is a lingering scent that exists within the perfume that is Pisces, that is Neptune. It's like one of my favorite expressions of how to really grasp the nature of Neptune or Pisces. It's an embedded essence that is part of something that lingers in the air, that when you smell perfume, for instance, you don't actually grab it and sort of like grab it like that, but you can know it's there even though it's something that's almost invisible in that way. So it's like Neptune. So it just permeates and just dissolves all of the boundaries. And so we have this entire kind of energetic wave that just moves through and starts to permeate all the boundaries. And now all of a sudden you start to see sort of pandemics arise globally in that way. And Neptune, conjuncting the sun within the context of this evolutionary cycle. So we're talking about evolutionary astrology here. The context of Neptune-Sun conjunction within Pisces and the kind of sun crossing over Neptune is almost, in a sense, again, this is an evolutionary astrology perspective. You can use different models to articulate what seems to be something that we as human beings are collectively experiencing at this stage. We can use evolutionary biology, we can use things like human design, we can use numerology, astrology, we can use just science, for instance. Any model that we individually as human beings have, we will project onto this situation, and then through that lens we will try to make sense of it. I mean, this is ultimately what we're doing here. We're sort of putting on a specific hat and a bunch of glasses, and we're kind of looking at it through this lens, and each of us has a unique perspective on what we're seeing based on this lens. So this is using evolutionary astrology's lens to frame the context of this situation. So as I said, the relationship that Neptune-Sun conjunction has, okay, at the same time that we have, I've written it down over here. We've got, here we go. Here's Uranus and Venus in Taurus. Okay, so Uranus and Venus in Taurus, sitting here, Venus at 9 degrees, which we'll talk about. Uranus sitting there at 4. Now, Uranus at the moment, and I didn't put the aspects in here specifically because I feel like it just clouds the information, but Uranus and Saturn are squaring each other at the moment. Okay, so there's Uranus at 4 degrees Taurus and Saturn at 29 degrees Capricorn. They're squaring each other. And that square between Uranus and Saturn is two things. One, the relationship that Saturn and Uranus has to each other. In evolutionary astrology, we call this a crisis in consciousness square. Okay, crisis in consciousness square. And the way that we define a crisis in consciousness square is the relationship that these two planets have to each other and their cycle that they have been on. Okay, so the square is just under 270 degrees in terms of the maturation, in terms of how how this cycle has matured. Saturn is the fastest moving planet in relationship to Uranus. So we will look at Saturn's cycle around Uranus like that. And when it gets to 270 degrees, that will be a crisis in consciousness square. Okay. Now, it's not 4 degrees Aquarius. If it was 4 degrees Aquarius, it would be 270, and that would be an exact crisis in consciousness square. We are leading into the crisis in consciousness square. So it's actually a disseminating aspect. And what it represents is this. The square itself represents the progression of awareness through time, where there is a beginning need to step outside of the previous held structures and acknowledging the role that those previous structures had, and to begin stepping outside of that role and saying, I don't want to participate in that anymore. Okay. That's what the cycle, that phase represents. It's the progressive wanting to break away from a mold, a structure, a pattern that once was supportive and meaningful, and that now wants to be individuated. We want to break free from it. We want to separate ourselves from it. So the analogy I use when I teach this in my astrology school is a person studies to become a lawyer or an attorney, okay? And in order for him to sort of become mature in the process, he needs to work for a law firm or work at a law firm for a set period of time. And that set period of time matures the person because he gains experience. He has scenarios that he has, spends like 5-10 years within the law firm. He gains some experience, maybe even 15. And then there's this need to want to step outside of it and say, I don't want to identify myself with a collective group. I want to step outside and label it my own. I want to start my own law firm. And that impulse to step outside and say, thank you very much for the time that I have used to grow in that place. I want to now step outside of that, progressively individuate. I want to start my own law firm. I want to put my own name on there. So the phasal relationship between Saturn and Uranus is very important in this current kind of energy at the moment. Because if you look at the archetypal themes that are embedded in the behavior that we are having as a human race, as this coronavirus kind of spreads through, and what it's actually putting, like what pressure it's, how are we responding to it? How are we interfacing with it? Firstly, the Neptune conjunct Sun dynamic is revealing to us that, firstly, the borders and boundaries that we create as human beings are man-made, and that in nature, these borders and boundaries exist naturally, but everything, Neptune can permeate it. And the coronavirus, in this sense, is an essence of permeation that lingers and moves through all of the boundaries and borders that we as man have created. And so it dissolves those things. It dissolves the division, while ironically creating division at the same time. It's kind of like a paradox. And that's what this paradox is with Uranus and Saturn, because the essence, the archetype of Saturn is the impulse to establish boundary or form. Okay. And Uranus, the essence is to prod and poke at the form, to say when, and to say the pattern has become stagnant. The pattern has become too rigid, or the pattern is outgrown. Okay. So what you have here is this beautiful dynamic where Neptune-Sun conjunction is here, and it seems like that those energies support this progressive impulse to begin challenging the outdated model structures and prod and poke and say, this no longer is part of the future, Uranus. This is no longer part of the future pattern. And it's almost like Uranus, in its quantum state, pushes Saturn and says, here's the future vibration, and here's what you're capable of holding. And because that is not capable of holding, you'll feel the pressure. And so there's kind of like this pressure that seems to be materializing, where the new framework of human awareness and evolution, in that sense, is putting pressure on the old to push it and to collapse it, to collapse it, to collapse it. It's almost as if the best way I think to describe this would be you take a grade 1 child and you put them in a grade 5 classroom, and you expect them to do the same kind of arithmetic, or to be able to form sentences and coherent sentences that reflect comprehension, right? It's not going to happen, because there are stages of development that must take place in order for there to be a natural stepping into grade 5. So in order to solve those equations and problems. So Uranus's communication with Saturn at this point in time is one where Uranus is saying innovation, the necessity to see different dimensions, and to prod and poke at what is the structural form and say, this is no longer working anymore. What are you going to do about it? Kind of question. And that's really kind of that conversation. And the conversation is rooted in the necessary need to individuate from the pattern within our personal lives. Because, by the way, this is also very personal to us as well. Like every single one of us, karmically speaking, has the Saturn-Uranus square. All of us has Saturn-Neptune conjunction. Sun conjunction Neptune. All of us have got this. Every single one of us that is on the planet today is going through an individual awakening around their karmic evolution. And it feels like the end of the road. So for all of us, within inside of ourselves, there is a kind of structural nature that is the adopting force of the collective structure interfacing with your own individual sense of structure. So it's kind of like the individual interfacing with the collective. And this like interface between the collective impression of what society defines as life and what you individually kind of is meeting, and there's this friction materializing itself. So, and what's occurring here is that there's a very distinct kind of end of the road dynamic. And so the question is, what are you individuating from? What is needing to be dissolved and to be individuated from? What do you need to begin understanding about your own psychological, emotional, and spiritual growth that no longer can go forward anymore? You know, it can look like patterns in your life that are associated with family dynamics. It can be perceptions of self-worth. It can be, and all of us, of course, have got our own personal karmic dynamics that are taking place. And so this collective kind of is all pushing us on individually to individuate ourselves in this process. So I'll come back to these kind of this natural square that's taking place, of course, with Uranus and Saturn. And again, I want to put across that Saturn is also, as I said, it's the boundary, it's the natural need to form boundary in order to establish security, while at the same time Uranus is that natural prodding and poking to say, come on, individuate, come on, individuate. There's a progressive sense of acceleration here. So while Saturn is very much about slowing down and doing this, Uranus is actually saying, accelerate faster, accelerate faster, accelerate faster. And so it's almost as if we've got one foot on the gas and the other one on the brake, and the person that's kind of navigating this or conducting this is in a Pisces land of, I don't know what to do. You know, panic hysteria. Neptune is the archetype of hysteria. It correlates to illusions. It correlates to what's real and what's not real, fabrication. And again, hysteria would be the very reflection of Neptune there. So again, it's kind of like, you know, these two really, really bizarre energy patterns that are showing up. And the message, of course, is, as I said, the kind of progressive dissolving of the boundaries that leads to space for individuation to take place. Okay. So let's talk about Jupiter's relationship to Pluto and Saturn, and Mars's relationship to Jupiter and Saturn. Okay. So Capricorn, as we know, is the archetype that ultimately is, in nature, it looks like the bark on the tree. In nature, Capricorn shows up as the shell on a crab. Capricorn shows up as the ends of, so if you had to look at like a plant, for instance, Capricorn is the stem that rises up like that, and it is also the edges of everything in nature. So the edge of everything in nature is Capricorn. And the reason why the Capricorn reflects that subtle edge in nature is because if you had to take two plants that are completely different, like a rose, for instance, and think of something else, like can't think of another flower at this stage, like, I don't know, a daffodil or something. You put the two together, you would be able to differentiate the two because of the border in which both of those plants manifesting within themselves. And so we are the boundary to take place in order for something to form shape. Okay. So when we have Pluto moving through Capricorn, a lot of astrology has been written about this. Many people have talked about this. I'm sure we're probably sick and tired of Pluto through Capricorn in terms of what that means, but I want to try and bring to the surface the nature of Pluto in its rawest form. And in different ways, I talk about Pluto, Uranus, and Saturn as the, in fact, in the last podcast that we just had with myself and Jen, you should go check that out, by the way. We talked about the outer planets as ambassadors from the universe to our solar system to assist humanity's kind of global experience of self-realization. And you can label the outer planets Neptune, Pluto, Uranus as unconscious energy. So Pluto itself will reflect the kind of frequency that is coming deeply, 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 deeply from. Very, very slowly, but man, does it catch energy as it kind of emanates from deep space. It just kind of very, 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 very slowly just moves like that. But by the time the waves hit Earth, the nature of the wave itself is just overpowering. It just moves through, and anything in its way just gets eradicated. And so Pluto itself, if we had to translate to the human experience, is things that we as a human race interact with, where we are faced with our deepest, deepest, deepest disempowerment. And also at the same time, the deepest, deepest empowerment. And this energy itself moves and eradicates and kills off anything and everything that is ultimately in something that is old. So another beautiful analogy to be able to understand Pluto is that wherever Pluto is in your natal chart, and at some point I'll get to doing this, Pluto in your natal chart, it looks like this. It's bloomed, okay? And as the flower is bloomed in your natal chart, as you are born and you live your life for a period of time, it reflects the process of decay. It reflects the process of the flower that is dying. So a petal starts to fall off and another petal starts to fall off until eventually the entire petal, the entire flower itself has died. And what that is referring to is the process of life itself that has been birthed into creation. It is existing, it is beautifully manifest, but then it is also the representation of the cycle of life as it becomes, as it just fades into the source energy. So this is again the nature of the times where Pluto is moving through Capricorn. And just recently, and I love this so much, by the way, I don't know if any of you know of a person called Brett Weinstein. I definitely encourage you to go check him out. And I was just busy. He was talking about something which I loved the language, and the language was this: in cellular biology, and I'm not like educated in this in any way whatsoever, but in cellular biology and biology itself, there is a term that is called senescence. And I loved it so much when I was listening to him talk about this in relation to cultural senescence. And senescence is really, just very briefly, it's an aspect of aging. Okay, so it's the process of cells aging, not the process itself, but it's an aspect of cells aging. And cells themselves don't die, they remain active within your cellular makeup, but they don't divide or mutate. So they're just laying dormant over there, kind of active, but they're not actually doing anything. And so senescence is the way in which we actually witness ourselves aging. And what he linked it to was, because he was asked the question, was there a relationship between cellular senescence and cultural senescence? And he was like, yes, absolutely. In fact, we're currently in a complete, and he has nothing to do with like astrology or anything of the sort, but he explained it so beautifully, because this is Capricorn, Pluto through Capricorn. In the most simplest forms, this is Pluto through Capricorn. It was like we in our current culture have accelerated to a point in which that the societal structure has reached its highest. The flower has bloomed to its essence. And now, naturally, as all things arrive in life like that, they also need to recede back into the source of its creation in order for next life to exist. And so this is not something that's unobservable, it's apparent. So this collective process of senescence is, we have a societal structure in which the ghosts of our form have grown old. And so this looks like an old economy, like the old ways of exchanging things. It looks like outdated ways of doing stuff. It looks like outdated patterns within our structure that are just existing there, minding their own business, but they are part of an aging process. And we and our society has aged. It's reached its like point of existence, and the aging process is very apparent to us right now. And something like the coronavirus, as an example, comes through, and what it does is it just puts subtly on Saturn square Uranus pressure onto this aged body, this aged cellular structure that is our human existence, and the form, the way that we deal with things, the way that we think with things, are just pushing consistently at us. And we need to innovate or eradicate. Like, that's the question that Pluto just gives it across. It's just like, it's eradication or innovation. Pluto will come along, push through that wave like that, and it says mutate, change, evolve, change. And as I said, things like, for instance, in Australia, when the fires were existing, it was very contained. Brazil, same thing. Other forms that have been progressively showing up in our collective unconscious, into the collective psyche, as above, so below. Everything that manifests externally, reflection of our internal process. And now that we have Jupiter at the moment coming into a balsamic phase to Pluto, and Mars, the evolutionary pressure point, moving across and then going to eventually move over Pluto within the next couple of weeks, this entire pressure is becoming immediately real, like immediately real for us right now. We're just, all of this pressure is just on top of this structure, and within the structure, every vulnerability is being exposed. Pluto just exposes everything, exposes all of the deepest disempowerment, all of the structures that no longer work for all of the things that no longer are supportive for collective evolution, just get exposed. And so what we're witnessing with show up in our collective field is just everything that we know collectively needs to be purified and burned out. Neptune correlates to the archetype of purification, because it's purifying all the toxicity. It's purifying all of the process of senescent cells. Everything needs to be cleared out, free radicals. And so this virus just comes along like that and just says, here is where our weakness is. Here is where we need to innovate. Here is where we need to individuate. Here is where we need to surrender the old way. And what's important to notice about this entire process is not that. What's important to notice about this process is the experience of Uranus and Venus's conjunction. Okay, Uranus and Venus's conjunction. I wanted to show you over here. So I'm going to click to the screen. And can you see this? Okay, so this is the planetary nodes for everybody on the planet. Okay. And the planetary nodes are just like your south node and north node of the moon. Each of the planets have their own nodal axis as well. They each have a south node and a north node. Okay. So the Neptune node, can you see over here? The south node of Neptune sits at between 10 and 14 degrees Aquarius. Okay, there it is there. There, 10 and 14 degrees Aquarius. And the north node of Neptune sits at 14 and 10 and 14 degrees Leo. Also notice here, Pluto's nodes sit there between 19 and 22 degrees. Okay, so those are important degrees to notice. Okay, you can see that there. Also notice here, Uranus's south node, north node, 11 degrees Sagittarius to 17, 11 degrees, 17 Gemini. Okay, now what I'm going to do is go back to the chart. Firstly, look at where Mars is and Jupiter. They're on the south node of Pluto. Okay, they're on the south node of Pluto. And then what you have over here is Neptune and the Sun also squaring the nodes of Uranus, which sit here. So that's where the nodes of Uranus sit, over there, there, okay? and Neptune and the Sun are squaring those nodes. And then you also have Jupiter, Saturn, and Pluto squaring those nodes, or not squaring it, but conjuncting the south node of Pluto. Okay. And then remember where I said, okay, so Aquarius, the Neptune nodal axis sits across here like this. Okay. Uranus and Venus are squaring that nodes. Okay. Uranus and Venus are squaring the nodes. So what does that mean? Why am I telling you this? I'm telling you this because when the planetary nodes get activated, the collective gets activated. When the planetary nodes get activated, the collective gets activated. Why? Because the planetary nodes are collective arcs. Okay? They are collective arcs that we as a human race funnel our consciousness through as an evolutionary trajectory. So it's like the collective's road of evolution. The outer planets have their own nodal axis, and those nodes are the road. And inside that road is the collective expression. So Neptune's nodes tell us how we spiritualize. Pluto's nodes tell us how we evolve. Sagittarius or Uranus's nodes tell us how we individuate. So let's take Jupiter, Pluto, Mars conjunction. And what that does is individually, that's the block, that's the wall. It's like very clear, by the way, this is the time where evolution will cease. We cannot go forward anymore in this process. It needs to collapse. The senescent fabric of reality, the molecular structure of the reality and the structure must be pressured because we must see where the vulnerabilities are. That's the message there. And it shows up in our financial structures, and it shows up in the boundaries, and in our emotional field, as what are we going to do? Who's going to look after me? I invest all my security in the outer authorities. All of the outer authorities are being looked to by the world to go, what are we going to do? Okay, that's that. Neptune and the Sun squaring the nodal axis of Aquarius or Uranus, okay, says, so we are culturally, remember Uranus, the nodes of Uranus move through Aquarius and between Sagittarius and Gemini. So it's like diversity and truth. Okay. Each of us has a unique perspective. So as we sit here today, like I said to you, that right now, not only are the borders of all cultures kind of like being permeated with Neptune, but we're also witnessing a global realization of how the different leaders from all of the worlds are interfacing with this, and everybody's watching them, and the pressure of mental structures to say, how are you going to save us? How are you going to help us? And then Uranus and Venus is there at 4 and 9 degrees. And that nodal axis, as in the nodes of Neptune and Neptune, as it's being squared. So the nodes of Neptune are being squared by Venus and Aquarius, Venus and Uranus at this point in time, are just pushing through the collective fear dynamic. And the reason why it's collective fear is because Taurus correlates to the archetype of survival. It's the essence of survival. So the trigger with Uranus and Venus is how we are going to survive. What happens if I catch the flu? What happens if I catch that? It's the pandemic. It's all what permeates is not the thing that you see on the surface. What's actually occurring beneath it is the prodding and pushing of the different ways in which we deal with something like this. And what's coming to the surface is exactly that. Like our survival is being threatened. And people that have got close families that have been affected by it, or people that are, all of us through our limbic system. This is probably the most important thing that I want you to experience, is that each of us that are sitting here today have got a limbic system. And this limbic system has got an amygdala. And that amygdala is responsible for making sure in our environment what is safe and what is not safe. Okay, now when that actual biological function was developed, it was developed when we were in a time where we were hypersensitive to our environment for all of our dangers. And we don't live in that type of reality so much anymore. But yet that function within the process of the limbic system is responsible 70% for making sure how you're going to feel. So when you get bombarded with the collective impressions of information, planetary nodes of Neptune, collective impressions relative to information, planetary nodes of Uranus, Sagittarius, Gemini, all the different perspectives, Sagittarius, diversed into the diversity of the way that we language things, Gemini, interfacing with the square to Neptune and Pluto. What's real? What do I believe? Somebody says it's only just as much as the flu. That person says it's like that. So you go on the internet, you type in coronavirus, and you can see the multitude of videos from different perspectives all coming at you like this, like this. And what are you basically being imprinted by? Your limbic system, your emotional sense. And so what then comes out, what gets projected back into the internet, projected back into the world, is your own structure, your own pre-existing structure that you look at the world through, that says, okay, this is how I'm going to see this perspective based on what I've taken in. And that's just telling you your own inner story. Just like now, that's why I said to you right now, as much as I am sharing the story with you here, I'm very aware of and openly saying this is through an evolutionary astrology lens. So it seems to me, it seems to me that we are being shown very, very deeply within the substructure of our psychology and our human perception of reality, and then even at a deeper level, the spiritualization of humanity. That's the deep stuff. What we're showing is these different layers, and how do we kind of synthesize those two together, or synthesize those three together? How do we kind of find a synergy between them? And what seems to be clear to me is, number one, and I must give credits to Peter Jeffs, who posted an article, and he had written something about Pluto through Capricorn reflecting this kind of social change. But then he also mentioned that Uranus at its position was also revealing to us the unresolved collective trauma. And this is what I love the most. Unresolved collective trauma that we have around our survival. Because it threatens us at the most immediate place. We're all going along, we're like taking selfies, we're talking about this, we're following the individuation process, and then all of a sudden we're like, oh my God, I'm isolated. I need to check my resources. You go on the internet, you type in people buying toilet paper, and then you see humanity really show itself. You know, as much as we have love, peace, light, and all those types of things, what's really raw and real is when you go to the store and you need to buy something that another person's purchasing, and all of a sudden your survival's threatened. So for the next couple of weeks, while Uranus or Venus is in Taurus, expect the energy to feel like you need to isolate and bunker yourself down and and kind of you fear for your survival, etc. Jupiter will make a conjunction to Capricorn on the 4th of April. The 5th of April, 5th of May, Uranus, the nodes will shift into Sagittarius and Gemini. And so really what we're actually dealing with right now, especially because the nodes, the South Node and North Nodes in Cancer Capricorn, is we're all being pushed to a point where firstly we need to slow down. Been running a treadmill since 2019. In 2020 is an opportunity to slow down, like really, really slow down and contemplate the meaning of what's valuable to you. That's the takeaway. What's the meaning? What's valuable to you? What's important to you? Now, in some way, shape, or form, this energy triggers that kind of deep inquiry into the nature of the pattern of society and the flower that once bloomed reached this pinnacle of human bargaining and exchange, and we all just expected the train to be there. We all just expected things to run on time, and then when it doesn't run on time, then we complain because it doesn't meet our need. But then all of a sudden something like this comes along, and then we're really sort of like pushed into a state of what really matters. What does really matter at the end of the day? And it sounds to me, if you have a look at the chart, you can see the moon's in Scorpio at the moment, but yesterday and the day before, the moon was moving over Neptune. Sorry, not over Neptune, pardon me. It was moving over 27, 28 degrees Libra, all the way to about 6-7 degrees Scorpio, which of course would be opposing Uranus and Neptune, Uranus and Venus. Pardon me. And Chiron's nodes sit between 25 degrees Aries, it's roughly about 6 degrees Taurus. And of course, the north node of Aries, the north node of Chiron sits the same 25 degree Libra all the way to about 6 degrees Scorpio. And as I said, it's like it seems that evolution and innovation is supportive for us, but what is really valuable? And I think we're social animals, we're social mammals, and it's important to notice that we have a limbic system, we have a need for connection, and we also have a need to deepen our relationship to the things that really truthfully matter in that sense. And I think that's what that Uranus theme is pushing to. And I've seen a lot of people on the internet just kind of write in comments, just come to that space of realization of what really matters, what's really important, and to give time and energy to that, and to really develop that and excel at that. If it becomes developing a stronger relationship between yourself and your mom, if that's possible, developing a stronger relationship between friends, etc., whatever that may be. I think it ultimately comes down to the realization of the division in the psyche between our issues as a human race, where we have divided ourselves, and to kind of unify and see that Neptune is saying, all of you are on this planet, and coronavirus is saying very, very distinctly, you're all on this planet. And I'll just show you where there are no boundaries. I have no preference. I don't have any preference. Somebody that's in America, somebody that's in China, somebody that's in, Iceland, for instance, you all got lungs. You all need to breathe, and that unifies you. So that's a really interesting thing that I found very fascinating about the kind of collective energy pulsing and permeating and pushing us across like that consistently, like pushing us to really awaken to what's really truthful. Okay, so I'm going to have some more water, and then I did promise to my patrons that I would respond to some questions that they have, which is what I'll do. And let's see if I've got some more time after that. We'll some questions in the YouTube channel. Okay. So there's one comment just straight away, Lionheart, saying, yes, I'm going to develop a stronger relationship between myself and my son. That's amazing. I just love to hear that so much, because it's emotional, it's valuable. Nurture that so much. Yeah, that's right. Okay. So I'm just going to quickly look at some questions from Patreon just over here. One person was mentioning that, of course, there's going to be a new moon in Aries, and that's the same time. If I looked, new moon in Aries will correlate to Mars making a new phase conjunction to Pluto. So the next new moon in Aries will exist on Chiron squaring the nodes, which is deeply significant. Which is, of course, a very big part of this. You know, we're really kind of working through unresolved collective trauma that we have, and it shows up as many different things. And I think it's just it's a different video to talk about those things. But wow, it's definitely something that will continue to move through us. It's going to reshape us completely. And that's what I think this is. It's that the Pluto's, Jupiter's relationship to each other are going to push it until eventually you need to accept the limitations, and then we'll accept the limitations of what we have done, and we'll need to innovate from that going forward. It's just moving. Yeah, absolutely. And Pluto as well. Pluto is correlating to DNA and RNA and mutation and viruses as well. So a Mars conjunct Jupiter, it just completely just shows you the collective the collective story that we're all sharing. All of our structures, all of our societal infrastructures are being pushed at this point in time intensely. Schools, for instance, closing down as an example. Jupiter, schools of education, there are infrastructures that were rooted in the past paradigm. You know, I saw a post today where it was like, yeah, that might push people to actually have online communities. The astrology conference that's called there's lots of things where online technology will provide us with the opportunity to still remain connected while being isolated. And that doesn't say it's a good thing. It's just very interesting thing. It's just a lot of pressure coming through right now. And I think that this is just a continuation of just pushing into a new space, and we'll just kind of develop a new being, and that will just be what it is ultimately. So somebody was saying that they have Pluto in the 4th house, and it was trining their Saturn in Gemini. That's in the 1st, and sextile Neptune Sag in the 6th house. Okay. When any planet is conjunct the galactic center, it's just like, you've got to imagine that, you know, for those of you that are old enough, which I think most of us are, to know the record players had grooves in them. These grooves are what the planetary nodes are about. The nodes are these grooves in the record. And so when you put the needle in the record, it plays music, and we all collectively hear it. So the planetary nodes of planets are like the grooves that consciousness moves through. It's like the riverbed. And we all kind of share the impressions and perceptions. And as we kind of as we swim that collective field, it becomes the feedback loop that we project collectively on something. So when you've got something like Pluto, or any planet that's conjunct the galactic center, you've got a kind of collective resonance where you are attuned to universal frequency. It's a very complex thing to just talk about, to be honest, but the galactic center is kind of like it's like a gateway in awareness that is formless, and it's just a pressure of deeper knowledge that needs to be translated into something that makes sense. Okay. Let's have a look over here. I know there was a couple of questions from. Again, as I said, so Adrian was saying Jupiter Pluto conjunction in Capricorn. What is the flavor of these archetypes coming together? And what we're dealing with here is Pluto eradicating deep core cosmologies and truths, philosophies and ideologies that we all hold deeply within inside of ourselves. And Pluto will just eliminate anything that is no longer held the truth. So we're all going to move through a collective perception that will be shaped by the world culturally. Culturally, we will all reform the way that we define our boundaries, basically. So that can look like shutting down boundaries, and can look like America saying to Europe, by the way, we're not going to let you, we're not going to accept any travel from Europe. That would be Jupiter conjunct Pluto and Capricorn. It's like just completely shut down the boundaries culturally. But it also at the same time, then Uranus square Saturn connection, and we'll find new patterns of connection. Okay. And also, Adrian was also saying she wants to know, what are my thoughts on the shifting nodes from Sag to Gemini, or North Node in Sagittarius, North Node in Gemini, South Node in Sagittarius? Right, prioritize. Okay. So here's something really interesting. When the nodes on the 5th of May switch to Gemini Sagittarius, what you're going to have here is more emphasis on cultural truths and the way that we as a globe find and begin to establish and form new rules in which we govern ourselves as a collective. So what you're going to see is Saturn's going to go into Aquarius, the nodes are going to shift into Sagittarius Gemini, and we're going to all, based on this current event, all going to be impacted by this nodal shift. And this nodal shift will say, okay, well, in 6 months' time, how many of you want to travel? How many of you want to travel in 3 months' time? Like willingly, maybe you need to travel, but you'll be caution. Like, so we're going to be, we're already being reshaped and sort of influenced by this experience. So it's not necessarily COVID-19 that's really the issue, as much as the effects of what COVID-19 can do for us regarding our limbic system and the way that we value things in life. So that's the big thing. And then, of course, all of the Pluto and Sagittariuses that have are coming into the planet. You must remember that all of the Pluto and Sagittariuses were born when Pluto was in Sag, right? And that South Node is going to progressively move across the Pluto of all of these people. And they're coming onto the planet in a way in which they're also participating in this kind of global series of challenges that we're all experiencing. There's much to be said about it, like, for instance, their relationship to how they're going to influence things like, the way that we form, as I said, new laws and regulations around travel, and how we perceive different cultures and places on Earth. So let's just put it to you this way. In the most simplest form, everything has changed. Literally, changes in the air. Literally, changes in the air. And it had to come through that way, because you think about the context of things changing and how resistant we are to change until something forces us to change. And that's another way of seeing Pluto, etc. So think about the cultural shift in the way that we diversify ourselves. Yeah, that's a big thing. Okay. I think, Adrian, I'll respond to that in the Jupiter Q&A, because it's something that's very specific to you. Margie. Okay. Okay, so that's pretty much the questions that we've got from Patreon, but I want to still focus a little bit on just amplifying the fact that Mars's transit through Capricorn at the moment is pushing the pressure on the collective structure. We're being made aware of this senescent infrastructure, the aging process of our structures. Right, so just look at the way that we as a human race interface and how we manage things. This energy is like a wave coming across and saying, This is the next phase in growing up. This is what is needing to be changed. This is what's vulnerable. Here's what's vulnerable. And the vulnerability feels like, oh my God, what are we going to do? When was the last time that you felt vulnerable and went, yeah, this is amazing? It was more like you needed space, you needed safety. You were uncertain about stuff. Okay. All right. We've been on the air for an hour or so, and maybe if there's a few questions that people want to ask in the chat. Otherwise, one or two questions that you've maybe got. But just remember, peeps, I won't be able to personally tell you what it looks like in your personal chart. So questions around your actual personal chart itself, unless it's very, very general in that sense, I can help. But anything else, just let me know. So just, okay. So anybody else that feels that they want to like, I don't know, anything that you want me to explain a little bit more, I'm happy to do that. Otherwise, I think this is a good time to end the stream. Okay, Violet Melon, insights on the stock market / economy. I mean, I wouldn't. Firstly, I can't even qualify myself as somebody that's around economics or I do look at those things. However, I would say this. I would say that this energy is definitely putting strain and pressure on the way in which we as a human race have defined, categorized, and structured interaction with each other, particularly the way that energy gets exchanged through value. So Venus conjunct Uranus comes in on the square, the planetary nodes of Neptune, and it shocks the way in which the financial structures are set up. And even further, any form of structure that is established in our society right now, where there is an exchange, where there is an agreement between the person that's using the structure and the person that is offering its services, etc., anything that is about exchange gets absolutely, like, this is where the most intense pressure is on. So in human design, they talk about this thing called the cross of planning. And in very simple forms, it speaks to the collective agreement that we all have, where we establish a structure based on exchange, and that exchange is based on a specific left-orientated way of thinking, which is very, when I say left, I mean not politically, sorry, but strategic way of thinking. And so the strategic way of thinking is very logical and runs in a sequential way, and this energy comes along and says, I don't care about that. I'm not interested. It doesn't even have, that's personification of it. That in some way, shape, or form, this energy has an agenda. It doesn't. It's just the nature of what is moving through us, and as that moves through us, it pushes and pressurizes all of the ways in which we understand exchange and how we value that exchange. And that's what's shifting for us greatly. It's the way that exchange works, the way that we're kind of getting a really beautiful way of seeing. No, that's not the best way to define that, but we're definitely getting to see a lot about how things just are the way that they are, and we don't question it because it's nothing's, there's no crisis on it. But now that this kind of energy has come through, and there's crises around airline companies that are struggling now because, of course, they are so dependent. And that's the thing here. It's dependency. It's like where there's dependency, and this dependency around structures and forms and our relationship to it, each of us have got a relationship to the dependency of these structures, and those structures with this crisis are coming through, and they're permeating the vulnerabilities within the structures, and that permeation and the awareness of the vulnerabilities are what we are expressing outwardly. And we're like, and so the stock markets and things like that are obviously on that high risk dynamic. The financial structures and the energetic exchange, all of those things are being threatened massively, and it freaks all of us out because the very nature of our survival is kind of being just put to the test there. So, okay. No, I'm not sure how long this panic will last, but what I can say to you is I would say that definitely this change that's in the air is something that it's already happened. So we've already been affected by it. If it stopped tomorrow, we would still be acting on the lingering effects of how that's reshaped the way that we as human beings see things. So, like I said, travel, for instance. How many of you now will go traveling and think to yourself twice about how you interact with airports and stuff? Companies will start to reinforce the way that they maybe offer security towards clients who are flying with them because they know that the potential for an outbreak could exist, as an example. So the effects of this COVID-19 cross-contamination spreading has done its job. The mutations happened. Now it's up to us to begin witnessing the integration of that process. So I would say that with Neptune's transit through Pisces still, that would be amplifying it. I would say that so maybe another 10 more days, maybe 6 more days, etc. And yeah, that's right. And so there's a lot that's going to be taking place. Venus moving out of Taurus would also be an influence to that as well. No, Jovian, I don't feel like this is connected to 5G. And one of the reasons why I say that is because I read a really, really cool article yesterday where a guy was writing, he was saying he directly works on the installation of this. And he said that one of the things that we don't know about 5G technology is that it has to operate at a 60 hertz frequency. And that 60 hertz frequency is what's dangerous with 5G technology. But in order to have 60 hertz frequency exist on 5G, it would need to have very short distances between the affecting poles, and no 5G technology that has been established operates at that 60 hertz thing. So as much as 5G is present and it is being installed in some places, the frequency of that 5G whatever that's called, I'm not entirely sure what the word was, has not been activated at the 60 hertz. And that 60 hertz is the thing that's really dangerous. He was like, I work on these things, I install these things, I know what this is about. And he was specifically talking about COVID-19 not having a direct correlation to 5G because of the activation of 60 hertz. It's not possible. That's what's really dangerous with it. Okay. Okay. Fantastic. So peeps, I am super grateful for this conversation today. I really hope that you got something out of it. And this will be obviously posted to the YouTube channel. Thanks very much for participating. And much love to you all, and take care of yourselves, okay? Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.